Okay. My name is Michael Lenson. I will be your co-host for today. Welcome everybody. It's 4 o'clock. I propose we will start. Maybe some people will still come in and fill up the room, but we'll see. We have an hour and a half, so always too short. This is a joint meeting organized by the Concerted Action on the Renewable Energy Sources Directive, Core Theme 5, together with the Association of Issuing Bodies, who serves the purpose of, throughout Europe, trying to get a more harmonized situation regarding GEOs. Afterwards, Dick van Everkorn, President of AIB, will tell something more about this. I take the opportunity to very briefly, for those of you that don't know, say something about the Concerted Action, what it's been, what we've done over the last couple of years. And before I do that, I have a announcement which is maybe important for some of you to know. This meeting is taking place in a very small room, so we have arranged for a webcast. So this meeting will be streamed on the internet, and also later on will be available in a video on demand system. So be aware. So what is the Concerted Action all about? There is several Concerted Actions going on at the same time. It's an instrument where we try to have a structured and also important, a confidential dialogue between national authorities that are responsible for implementing directives. So there is also one on the energy efficiency, and this particular one, CARES, has been dealing with the Renewables Directive 2009-28. So their participating countries exchange experiences and best practices, and they participate, so to speak, in a cross-learning process, and they develop common approaches. We simply try to learn from each other, not making the same mistake twice when implementing issues that we came up with in the European sphere. So CARES is actually a second part of the project. We had a CARES 1 first. It's around 7 core themes. I can recommend you to look into the website. So this particular core theme is about guarantees of origin. We, in the last 3 years, discussed many issues, amongst them, for instance, the information items which should be covered by a guarantee of origin, but also the requirement that disclosure and guarantees of origin go together. So we've asked AIB, who is providing a European hub, to see to it that legislation on disclosure is in place. And then, of course, we discussed issues like a more coherent disclosure of electricity. We might need a more harmonized approach, also when disclosing energy sources for which no guarantee of origin has been issued. We discussed issues like how to create trustworthy disclosure within a European market. We might need a harmonized disclosure reporting period, as this is differing from member state to member state still. There might be one common deadline for publication of disclosure statements, and maybe we should elaborate a bit more on the sequence steps to be followed within disclosure procedures. And then there is an important issue when disclosing the guarantee of origin of electricity for which no GEOs have been issued. I've mentioned that before. Shouldn't we all use the same instrument again to disclose that, let's say, non-renewable electricity? Many countries already use today the so-called European attribute mix, and we think it's important that this is continued as long as there are no guarantees of origin for all energy sources.
I want to tell you about the vision that AIB has for Europe energy policy and Europe's energy consumers. And a vision, in my opinion, should start with what you want to achieve. What do we want to achieve? We work for reliable and accurate information for all Europe's energy customers, and consumers in this context means both small household PME type consumers and big corporate consumers, information on the source of their electricity. Why do we want to follow that goal? Because we feel that information can empower consumers to choose electricity from specific sources, and it also makes consumers accountable for the consequences, and first and foremost the environmental consequences of their choice of electricity contracts. And in doing so, we want to contribute to the decarbonization of the power sector in Europe. We want to contribute to the energy transition, and we want to move towards a renewables-based power system. What have we done until now to achieve this vision? We are not there yet. I'm the first to admit that, but first and foremost, we have created the Association of Issuing Bodies to develop the standard for guarantees of origin. Guarantees of origin being, of course, the instrument from the European directive to prove the renewable origin of 1 megawatt hour of electricity. So we standardized the instrument, and then we developed a hub which is destined at efficient trading, even at international scale, of guarantees of origin. Because if you have a standardized instrument, you can trade it without afterthoughts or without doubts that you are getting what you expect. We also play a vital role in providing the disclosure information to the consumer, in the sense that we calculate the residual mix, which Michael referred to under the other name, which is the European attribute mix, which is the sort of the closing element for disclosure information. I'll come back to that immediately. And we provide reliability by doing audits and reviews of our members' practices to ensure that they faithfully follow the standard that we have developed. We contribute to the European fraud prevention and detection mechanisms, and we have developed a vision which we have written down in the so-called reflection paper, and this is the vision I am talking about here. So how do we link our business of standardizing the guarantee of origin, or the GO, with consumer information? First and foremost, our goal with standardizing the GO is to make the GO process as reliable and make it harmonized from cradle to grave. And the process on the right is just a schematic about how we do that. So we can ensure that the green part of the information that customers find on their bill, saying you are getting electricity from so many, this much percentage from nuclear, this percentage from fossil, this percentage from renewables, the green part, the renewable part, is reliable. That's what we've been doing with the AIB. But unfortunately, what is put on the bill, the fuel mix you find on your bill as a consumer, is not all about GOs. Still, what works, what is good is that in most countries within Europe, guarantees of origin are the only mechanism that is now allowed for selling power from renewable sources to consumers. Also, the fuel mix in most European countries is based on the residual mix, or at least a similar approach. EECS, the standard we developed with the AIB, the European Energy Certificate System standard, requires disclosure legislation to be in place. So there needs to be a law that consumers must be informed about their fuel mix. And we are very strict on double counting. But the problem is that outside of GOs, talking about the non-renewable part of the fuel mix, it is pretty much a wild, wild west where anything goes. And this, unfortunately, impacts the reliability of the whole disclosure system. So what is this disclosure system and what is this role of the GO? This is how it works for renewable electricity. You have a renewable production source. The electricity is fed on the grid and arrives at the consumer. But there is also a book and claim system, which is being done through the GO registry. And these certificates, or GOs, guarantees of origin, can be traded if there is need for that on the certificate markets. So this is a clear system. The electricity follows the physical route, and the proof of the renewable origin is done by the book and claim system. The problem is that this system is only applicable for about 15% of the fuel mix. And the rest, the coal, the nuclear, and other sources are being tracked differently by contractual tracking, or if lack thereof, with the residual mix. And therefore, the information that reaches the consumer on these sources is not as reliable as the green information. So clearly, we have still a long way to go to integrate the GO on the one hand as the instrument for green electricity tracking and disclosure as a way of informing and empowering and making accountable consumers. So, as I've said, 85% of the tracking is not done by GOs, but through other mechanisms. This means that these mechanisms can be rivaling and therefore inefficient. They can be unmeaningful because most of your fuel mix can be, and is in most countries, based on the residual mix. It's unreliable because it's not clear where this information on the non-renewables part comes from. And it is not equal in the sense that there's no level playing field, because the cost of the reliable part is only on the sector of the RES producers. Therefore, there's no level playing field in terms of burden sharing among producers. So, another problem is that there is information, there is legislation which imposes that CO2 and radioactive waste impacts of electricity production is being reported to the consumer, but these elements of information are not linked to the GOs. So the GOs are the mechanism for disclosure, but they do not include all the needed pieces of information. The electricity suppliers, they can sell green electricity products, but the problem with the actual disclosure system is that some of the green character can end up with the non-green consumers through the residual mix. So there's no danger of double counting of GOs, but there is a danger of GOs being double counted at the disclosure part of the process. So what do we need to achieve our vision of empowered and well-informed, accountable energy consumers? We need, first and foremost, to integrate the instrument, the GO, with the purpose, which is the disclosure information. If we do so, we should do so to the full extent by integrating and harmonizing this in the directives. Secondly, we propose to include CO2 and information on the radioactive waste on the GO, so to make one single instrument that carries relevant information towards the consumers and therefore make them accountable. And thirdly, we propose to go to full disclosure in the sense that Europe has developed a brilliant instrument for tracking electricity from renewable sources, but has, for now, not chosen to go the full length and use that same brilliant instrument for all other sources of electricity. So, finishing up, where do we want to go? We want to go to this system. This is the actual system, and we want to take away what is not really welcome in this system. We want to put all the sources into the geosystem, and therefore we can get rid of these unclear and unreliable tracking mechanisms. And therefore, we can ensure that all the consumers will be clearly and consistently be informed about the origin of their electricity. So that is the vision I wanted to share with you, ladies and gentlemen, about where we feel that the directives should go. We feel that consumers are entitled to clear information, and we think this is the way to go to achieve that goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dirk, for what has been a nice introduction to the concept of full disclosure. As it's become known, and you talked about this as an instrument for consumer empowerment. And what was also interesting, I think, was that you introduced the accountability of consumers regarding the environmental consequences of their choices. Now we've asked another speaker, and I'm happy to announce Mr. Jörg Mühlenhoff from BUIC, the European Consumer Organization, and he will briefly tell us something and give us some statements about what full disclosure could mean for consumers. The floor is yours.
You open the presentation, I see. Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation. Well, I'm speaking for BUIC, the European Consumer Organization. It's an umbrella organization of 42 consumer organizations in 31 European countries. Most of them in those member states where we have green electricity offers, our members, consumer organizations, also deal with these offers as a part of liberalized electricity markets. The question, what will full disclosure mean for consumers? Well, honestly, it would be a very short presentation. I already mentioned that to Dirk that I would like to speak too much more, and to be honest, I don't have a clear answer. I'm not sure about this, what will be the impact of full disclosure for final customers. It could be that full disclosure is a solution, but it could also be that full disclosure to some extent distracts our attention from one core problem which consumer organizations see since quite some years in the field of renewable electricity tariffs or green tariffs, however you call them. It's how consumers perceive these offers. We are speaking for quite normal household consumers who are not experts, like the people sitting in this room. And normal household consumer perceives these tariffs looking on advertising and maybe eventually on the fuel mix disclosure, which he receives once per year. Thanks to the directives, we have the right to know where our electricity comes from. This is really a step forward. This is a big success. So consumers indeed have the choice, and thanks to guarantees of origin, this is tracked. And it is tracked like you see it in this slide. In the center you have an electricity supplier who is compiling an offer. The dark blue arrows show the cash flow, the financial flow, you know. The money which in the end the consumer has to pay for the electricity generated, purchased and traded by the supplier and then sold to the final customer at home. And once a year at least the final customer, our household consumer, gets this fuel mix disclosure with normally a nice pie chart. You see it down there. In this case, 20% of the electricity is bought from renewable power plants. So in the end, there's a little green piece of the cake, as you might say. 20% is renewable. So our problem is that while this is a clear fuel mix, we also see a lot of misleading offers. A misleading fuel mix would be this kind of offer, again, compiled in the center by a supplier, but here, again, the portfolio, the power generation capacities are the same. The supplier buys most of the electricity from non-renewable power plants, but thanks to the unbundled purchase of GOs, the supplier can put the GOs on the bill exceeding the mere cash flow. What I want to say is that these GOs can serve as a sort of green facade or green smoke to hide the fact that the supplier is still continuing with business as usual. So in this case, officially and legally, you have a 100% renewable electricity tariff. And this is what consumers understand as being part of energy transition to some extent when they see this on their bill. But in reality, still most of the money probably goes to non-renewable power plants. We all know that the price for GOs is really very, very low. And so the financial contribution which the consumer expects to do is not really carried out. And this is why normally we have to warn against these kinds of offers. And the problem is that suppliers in the directive are allowed to trade with certificates and to detach those certificates, those guarantees of origin, from the megawatt hours produced and sold. We would like to see the financial flow together with the flow of GOs. So the problem in the end, I think it's clear that this is not a real 100% renewable electricity tariff in terms of what consumers are paying for. This is quite deceiving, and it leads to a kind of, well, I would say, problem of being trustworthy. I don't use the word greenwashing for these kinds of offers. Others do that. For example, the European Commission in their Consumer Trends report, which was published last October with the first State of the Energy Union. There they say that these kinds of greenwashing offers in energy markets, they can be an issue with consumers being misled by incorrect claims on the environmental impact. Of course, it is not illegal. It is correct to do so. It's according to the directive, it is correct, but the consumers don't understand it like this. They think that when they see a 100% green pie chart on their advertising, on their bill, that all their money naturally goes fully to renewable power plants, and this is not the case. So in the most advanced renewable electricity markets, there is a public debate which says, well, there is a kind of problem with this. It's difficult to explain it. Consumers do not necessarily understand all these details of GO trade, and I think they don't have to. But there's a kind of uncertainty, and you see this in several surveys done by our member organizations. And you see it also in the expectations that you hear from consumers, or even when talking with energy experts, they think often that they pay their money under such a tariff for supporting energy transition. And this is even more worrying when you know that quite some consumers are even willing to pay more. So I won't go into details, but roughly a third of consumers in Europe are willing to pay up to roughly 10 euro per month more to be sure that they support renewable electricity generation. So, dear suppliers, when you have quite a couple of consumers willing to pay more, you should really deliver. And this is, unfortunately, it is not yet made sure. So, full disclosure. Can it help or not? Well, I'm not sure about that. As I said before, it might create a level playing field. Why shall only renewable power plant operators be obliged to use these GOs? It should be done by everybody. So just it's a matter of fairness, a matter of coherence. It's also a matter of having statistics well published in an accurate way. But apart from that, there is too little experience with these models at the moment. We have full disclosure implemented in Austria since 2002 and in Switzerland since, I think, 3 years, and it's voluntary in Sweden, but nowhere else, as far as I know, in Europe. Our Austrian member organization is quite satisfied, and they think that full disclosure works. However, we have to make clear that misleading offers are not allowed. Even in Austria, you have the case that some suppliers still import, for example, cheap Norwegian GOs coming from hydropower plants to cover their dirty fuel mix at home. This is still possible under full disclosure, and that's why we would say it is not necessarily a solution to our problem. And what we want you is not just to buy and trade GOs, but we want suppliers to really contribute to new generation capacities, additional new power plants. This is what consumers are willing to pay for, and we should make sure that this happens. Okay, how can we do this? We have to prove this additionality. Is there a real environmental benefit? Meaning, is there really a new power plant invested thanks to the green choice made by a consumer? How can you prove that? There is a possibility. There are several models run, for example, by labels, by rankings. Initiation model, I won't go into details, means that you increase renewable electricity generation with the number of clients. Supply model, meaning that you are obliged as a supplier to sell at least a certain share of your offer only from recently built renewable power plants. Or a quite simple model is the fund model. 1 cent, for example, 1 euro cent per kilowatt hour paid by a consumer goes into a fund put aside to finance investments in new power plants. Who should implement this? Who is taking the responsibility? Well, consumer organizations and environmental NGOs partly have been doing this. For example, with independent quality labels. Our members are running these labels in Germany and in Austria. It's working more or less well. We have supplier rankings in the Netherlands and in Belgium with a more broad methodology looking on the whole environmental footprint, investment and divestment of the supplier, not only on the fuel mix, because we know the informative value of the fuel mix is not always that clear and high. And in the end, we would ask regulators to also engage and to be more active on this issue. Some regulators have been doing this in Denmark and in the UK. They set some minimum criteria, and this is necessary, I think, to have a level playing field, to have a fair competition, and in the end to improve transparency, because otherwise consumers will lose confidence in these liberalized markets and they won't switch anymore at all. And this is what we all should avoid. So, dear regulators, dear suppliers, and dear Commission, please take action and think about implementing these qualitative criteria in the future Renewables Directive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mühlenhoff. What I take away from this for myself is that above and beyond the discussion on full disclosure, I think you put some extras on the list, if I may put it this way, that in your opinion are important for consumers to be dealt with. And there's a few in this last slide that you mentioned. Now I want to go to a representative of let's say the other side of the spectrum, energy producing companies, Mr. Aurel Callier of Eurelectric, and you're going to tell us something about your views on this issue, and maybe also with a short view on whether you think this can be introduced cost effectively. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting us to this event. Eurelectric is the association, the industry association of the electricity industry. With having members in all member states, Norway, etc., and also have a lot of affiliate members from countries around Europe. First, I'd like to take you to the Eurelectric position on GOs. Just take you through it quickly. We are very much supporter of the GO system. The because it brings reliable information on, at least for this time, on renewable energy, where it's produced and what kind of source is used. This means that this information is also available to the consumer who is consuming this electricity based on a contract where the supplier has, well, at least is selling him this kind of green electricity. Of course, there can be improvements, and with GOs for being the basis for disclosure for at least green electricity, we have a first step. And we agree with I think most of the points of the AEB reflection paper. So we do think that the rules should be merged and harmonized, that it at least should be mandatory to verify green products, and that's for the idea to bring the GO systems to all electricity produced, being it at that way the sole basis for fuel disclosure. It's a it's a good idea. We should certainly look into it, but we should try to do it on a cost-effective basis. So we can see already in some countries that it's done on a voluntary basis, and we think that's a good step to start, to get acquainted with the system, to see if it works and if there is a demand in more detailed information, maybe also more reliable information than just having a residual mix, defining how the grey electricity you buying, what kind of footprint it has. If we look to this voluntary approach, that means that GOs can also be issued for all kind of electricity produced, but it becomes, we start with a way that maybe producers voluntarily do it and makes it available for the market to pick it up, but also from the other way around, where suppliers are taking the initiative and start asking producers to come up with GOs so they can, towards their consumers specifically, underpin what kind of sources they want to sell to their consumers. And this is, I think, where we, for a large part, disagree with BEUC on the role GOs can play. But first, I want to state that transparency is, of course, here very much important. When suppliers are clear and transparent on what they use, what kind of information they use from GOs to sell certain products to their consumers, we don't think it's greenwashing. For instance, a supplier can be very clear in offering two green products, one based on hydro from Norway, but already be clear from it from the start, call it Norwegian hydro green electricity or whatever, but also can provide a green electricity product based on wind from within the country. And probably there can be a price difference. It doesn't have to be, but it can. And if it is, it probably is the price difference between the GOs, where probably a Norwegian hydro GO is a bit cheaper than a GO from wind produced within the borders. So, and as the green or the renewable production in Europe and probably within country borders is not yet enough to, or is still not 100%, it's good to have the possibility to also have this information about grey electricity sources, and to see if consumers can also there be offered products based on only gas, only coal, just what consumers like to have, and that if they don't make a choice and there is still a residual mix based on not clearly positioned GOs, then it's also the information is reliable and complete for the consumer. So I think it's most what I think is important. Doing this only from an industry perspective and is not enough. We do also have to inform consumers where the information is coming from, how GOs are working, and if we do that in a European-wide system, it has to provide the reliability that it needs for consumers to be convinced that what the information they get is also really linked to the kind of product they buy. This is also the case because where people are living near a wind farm, sun collector farm, or a hydro facility, and they don't make a choice and get grey, see on their bill that they have a grey product, it's of course, they have to understand that although they live near a renewable producing facility, that is not directly linked to the product they buy. And it's important that consumers understand how this works, and I think there are more this kind of information and based products in the market where this also works. Then on this additionality, no, consumers should not have the idea that solely on GOs based products that they are paying to have more investment in GOs, in renewables. So also here transparency should be leading, and consumers, it should be clear for consumers what they are buying and if they are providing extra investments into renewables. Suppliers can provide this kind of products, and then it should be clear, and then it also should be accountable that the extra they pay or the specific levies they pay on this product are also really invested in new projects. But it should not be linked to the GO system as such. GO is especially making information available and being clear about the sources which you could link to a contract. Could it, in the end, having additional payments replace the current subsidy schemes? Well, I probably think not on the short term, but maybe in the end, when consumers really want to contribute to a renewable energy system, it could be. Last slide, some information on, well, if we put carbon information also on the GOs, does it really bring us also to really decarbonizing the system? We think the information could be provided by the GO, or should be, because in the end you want to make clear what the effects from the product which you sell to your consumer is. So more information could have a good role, but we think that ETS is for this purpose more the system that we should use. So don't expect too much from putting this information on the GOs. Maybe at the same time with the discussion on additionality, but for making the information available to consumers, we think it's a good idea. I would leave it with that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Callier, for some views of Eurelectric. I heard some different views regarding the additionality aspects that Buke was talking about. I think we might get to that a bit later in the panel discussion also a bit. But in general, I think we've heard that you think the concept of full disclosure is a good idea, although you say it should be maybe tried out on a voluntary basis to start with. That being said, we have a speaker now that more in general tries to say something about how the market could work for guarantees of origin, and replacing someone today with us is Timo Schulz, and he's representing Europex, the European Association of Power Exchanges. Mr. Schulz, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Michael. As said, I am Timo Schulz and I'm representing Europex, the European Association of Energy Exchanges, which means that overall our membership consists of 26 energy exchanges and marketplaces all over Europe who are engaged in the GO market in various functions. So some run wholesale trading for GOs, some run registries, but many of our members are active in the GO market. So they organize markets. That means also that they are active in power trading, in organizing gas markets and so on. So it's energy, power and energy related products. And so this is why we have also been contributing to the policy development in GOs. And this is why I will say a few words about this perspective that we also recently raised in 11 recommendations to the European Commission and to all European stakeholders on how we believe the GO market and its functioning could be improved. That paper is also available on the Europex website for download. So coming to the recommendations itself, first of all, we think it's crucial to extend the scope of GOs to all sources. Today, it's a shame that much of the discussion is so much focused on renewable energies. I think we've learned a lot with renewables. I think there is great demand for energy from renewable sources that are tracked by GOs. As we can see in a country like Germany, we have 5 or 6 million households that have contracts that are backed by GOs. There is great interest for renewable GOs, but that's not all, because we also get requests from market participants who are actively asking for other kinds of GOs. And we think if we would introduce GOs for all production sources, that would really put the consumer even more in the driver's seat, because then he could even more freely choose what production mix he wants to procure. And I think that GOs as an established instrument could be a way to do that. Of course, full disclosure, as has been mentioned many times, is an important topic. We see some countries that have pushed ahead with this, like Austria, and we believe that others should follow suit. Also, GOs are the established tool for disclosure. They should also be the mandatory and sole tool for disclosure of green power in Europe. And with the EEX standard, I think the AIB and other energy market actors have done a great deal of work to get this standard that is standardized throughout Europe, and that has facilitated the trading also on wholesale markets of the GEO product. And so we should further advance the standardization of GEOs, as there still remain some differences in the national implementation of the directive. Then we believe GEOs and disclosure are they are two sides of the same coin. We should really put them in one piece of legislation. And we think the AIB has done so much for the GEO market. I think it should be considered whether it could be given a more formal role as well in the process. So from our perspective, this could help to further push ahead the standardization of rules in the GEO market. For instance, as was already mentioned, with disclosure periods. So something akin to a role of ENTSO-E could be envisaged in the long term. Also, residual mix should be included in the RED II. And an important topic is VAT fraud, because GEOs are a financial product. There is a risk of financial carousels, for instance, but fortunately we do have recipes against that. We just need to implement them. So there has been the possibility always to have reverse charge applied to GEOs, as is the case for other markets, as power, as gas. So the same level of security that we have in power and gas markets, we think it's crucial that we also have that for the GEO market. And there are some countries, again Austria, that have already implemented this, but there are some countries that have not yet implemented reverse charge for VAT in the GEO market. And to minimize the risk of fraud, this would be a crucial step. Also, GEOs are already offering the possibility to offer GEO-backed tariffs to consumers. We think that one idea could be to make suppliers offer at least one GEO-based tariff to further push ahead the instrument. And also, GEOs could be used for the 2020 targets at EU level. Because as you know, we have renewables targets at the EU level. There are some countries who will deliver on them more easily than others. And GEOs could be an instrument to balance out these different levels of target achievement between countries. So that should be assessed further. Also, GEOs are already used for renewable energy. They should be, it should be considered whether they could also be applied to heating and cooling mandatorily, as is already the case in some countries today. So having said that, I think that concludes my presentation. And as I mentioned, these 11 recommendations in more detail are also available through our website.
Thank you, Mr. Schulz, for telling us something about the views of Europex. I think some people recognized and probably welcomed sentences like putting consumers in the driver's seat. And it was nice to hear that also from your perspective or your members' perspective, there is already explicit interest for guarantees of origin regarding other energy sources than renewables at the moment. Now we turn to a representative for a group of consumers / traders that is probably interested in guarantees of origin for multiple reasons. Unfortunately, we announced a speaker from the RE100 group. She could not come, but we found a last-minute replacement, and I'm very happy that you were available. Jared Bruslavsky, representing Rex International. And as this was a really last-minute replacement, we don't have any slides, but I'm sure you can tell us something about reasons that drive larger corporations, especially to consume electricity from renewable sources, and what their interest in having a good GEO scheme is.
Maybe I could ask if it's possible to open the door. Maybe I'm just warm, but if it's a little bit, if it's too loud in the hallway, then we can close it, of course. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate being able to come here and speak today. The person that was going to speak was from RE100, and I think it's very important to describe who RE100 is, what this organization is. RE100 is an organization of 100 corporate companies. These are all names that you know: Google, IKEA, H&M, Procter & Gamble, Unilever, 100 corporate companies that have made the claim to say, we will purchase 100% renewable electricity. This is an extremely important milestone. For the first time, we have real companies, corporate companies, that are saying, we want to purchase 100% renewable. We don't care what the governments are doing, essentially, when it comes to renewables implementation. We want to make a stand and really push forward on our own from the side of the consumption. And this is where I think I'll have most of my discussion today, is there is an important difference between the production of renewable electricity and the consumption of renewable electricity. And that a tool to prove that you have consumed a specific type of electricity is the guarantee of origin. That is the legislatively mandated certificate to prove the origin of electricity in Europe. Maybe we should take a perspective and look at how companies look at the electricity market. This is an important perspective, I think, especially for us, that we're all here, experts from the electricity industry or all these different types of organizations. How does a company look at this? They look at it in three ways, the same way that we looked at liberalization. 25 years ago, the company said, we have one choice, how much we buy. We can turn the lights on and buy electricity, or we can turn it off and not buy electricity. Then 10 years ago, or 15, 20 years ago about, the European government said, we want to give companies as well a choice in who they buy their electricity from. That's the second choice. So now all these companies, IKEA, Google, H&M, they're saying, oh, now we have a choice in who we can buy it from. But what's the last step in that puzzle? It's, of course, the product that you buy from all these different suppliers. And that's what the guarantee of origin is. It is the product that these companies are buying. Because companies more and more often are looking at those three questions: how much we can buy, from who we can buy it, and what we can buy. And they are more and more having the exact same answer. How much do we buy? As little as possible. From who do we buy it? Well, preferably from ourselves. And the third question is, what do we buy? Renewables, because it doesn't have a long-term risk. If it's built, there's no input costs. For many different reasons, they prefer renewables. And this is funny, because we look at the guarantee of origin market and we talk about the prices of certificates. It seems like a weird question if you're coming from a corporate company. A corporate company is saying a price of a certificate. How much does it produce? For them, it's more a question of make or buy. They're looking at this and saying, listen, we can make renewable electricity and then use the guarantee of origin to prove that it was ours, or we can buy it from another company that does it more cheaply than we can do it ourselves. This is how corporate companies are looking at this. And right now, corporate companies in general in Europe, by some statistics, purchase 70% of all the electricity in Europe, 70%. And we aren't even looking at what they do or what they care or the products and choices that they're making. So when we're talking about putting consumers in the driver's seat, it's about putting all consumers in the driver's seat. It's not just about putting households, which is extremely important as well. But I would ask a question. If you ask the average household consumer what electricity is, I only think a few percent would be able to say that it's an electron. So to explain the intricacies of the electricity market to every household consumer, I think is an unrealistic goal. But to have a large majority of the physical consumption on the grid understood, I think is a goal that we can definitely try and meet. I'll give a good example of not putting the consumer in the driver's seat. Right now this is a real example, and you can look it up on Google's blog. Google, they decided to build a new data center in Finland. They chose Finland because they could use ocean water for cooling. For all these different reasons, it was an extremely sustainable and cost-efficient place to build the data center. But they also wanted renewable electricity for that data center. Well, the siting wasn't very good for renewable electricity. So what did they decide to do? They put the renewable electricity in Sweden, in the northern portion of Sweden. And it's their renewable electricity, they put it there. And they're using guarantees of origin to prove that we produced it in Sweden and we're consuming it in Finland. But the problem is, it's being counted in Sweden's targets, not in Finland's targets, even though the electricity is clearly being used in Finland. And there's not a single statistic anywhere in the Swedish market or the Finnish market that shows what the consumers have actually consumed. There's no statistic produced by the national governments that say, our consumers consumed this amount of renewable electricity. All the governments are looking at is how much they produced. So this is where it comes down again to that discussion about there's a difference between production and consumption. And we need to start focusing more on consumption because the consumers, it's in their name, consumption. It's what they're doing. They don't care how it's produced or where it's produced as long as they can consume it. So they're looking for the most cost-efficient place to produce renewable electricity because their stakeholders, us, we're their clients, are wanting to purchase, or wanting them that they purchase renewable electricity. So there are a few things. I don't want to go too long about this because I think it's good to have a little bit of discussion at the end of the presentation. But there are, of course, a few things, 4 steps, I would say, really to kind of making the process easier for corporate consumers. And one thing I would like to mention as well is corporate companies are not just looking at Europe for these solutions. The guarantee of origin market is not unique to Europe as well. There's the REX market in the US, and right now on the discussion in the US as well is full disclosure. So these discussions are taking place in multiple places at multiple times. Full disclosure is not necessarily a European discussion. In the US, of course, they call it all attribute generation. They don't have a slick term like we do. I think full disclosure sounds a lot better. But it is important to recognize that it's not just a European discussion because the consumers are not just purchasing electricity in Europe. They're doing it all over the world. So 4 main points. Yeah.
Make sure that the sound is not.
So there's 4 main points that I would think would really improve the demand, the consumption of renewable electricity. One is making guarantees of origin and focusing on disclosure. I think multiple parties have said this here. This is critical. The guarantee of origin is just the proof of production. The disclosure is the proof of consumption. So these need to be linked because they aren't separate instruments. They're actually the same instrument that need better ties, whether it's in a single legislative agreement or whether it's some other type of agreement that links these two. I don't know what the best option is, but of course, these need to have stronger links. The second is indeed standardization of the rules for issuing guarantees of origin. The Association of Issuing Bodies has made a fantastic job in standardizing the GO markets around Europe. Europe is a single market, and we can't forget it. But the fact that Poland is not connected to the EAB is difficult for companies like IKEA that have a lot of consumption or production in Poland. It makes it very intransparent. All of a sudden, they have to go from an electronic system to a paper system. It's very intransparent for them. So the standardization is extremely important. Also, one other thing is standardization in the rules around guarantees of origin. And we could think of things like in Germany, if you received subsidies for your production device, you're not allowed to get a guarantee of origin. But in the Netherlands, you are. And these sorts of differences create differences in price, create differences in the market, and create misunderstandings among the consumers. So we have to really think about making a level playing field, not only in the standardization, but also in the rules of all these different markets. I'll give a crazy rule, actually, and this is maybe in Ireland. In Ireland, to have an account on the GO registry, you have to be an Irish company. This seems to be even against the rules of the European Treaty, I would say. So there are some things that we really have to fix and really have to look into as well. Another one is, of course, the GO displaying carbon information, because I do have to agree that the EU ETS and the GO system are completely different instruments. The EU ETS is about a system between producers. It's a producer and a producer. It's not really intended as a consumer system. So putting the information about how much electricity is produced on a guarantee of origin is very important. Then the last portion, of course, is not forgetting national consumption. In a country like, for example, I'll give a good example in Germany or the Netherlands, these consumers tend to purchase quite a lot of renewable electricity. But it's not seen anywhere in the statistics that there's a lot of renewable electricity that has been purchased, more than they produce themselves. And on the other side of the coin, there are many countries that export quite a lot of renewable electricity, and it's nowhere seen in the statistics that they export quite a lot of renewable electricity. Creating just a consumption target or creating a consumption reporting would really help to inform the consumers and support the consumers in saying, yes, we want to purchase renewable electricity so that our country can also claim that they have consumed and produced a certain amount of renewable electricity. So with that, I don't want to take any more time, but yes, thank you.
Thank you, Jared Bruslavsky from Rex International. It were a lot of points within 10 minutes, but I'm sure there's interesting things for the discussion in them. If it were only that you stated that the EU is not alone in this and that there's apparently also some other developments. Now, before I want to give the speakers slash panelists the chance to confront each other with some remarks or observations and maybe enter into a small discussion, I'd like to give a few moments to Philip Good from the Commission, from the DG Energy, who is with us, whether he has some first observations or responses, and maybe you can also tell us something about what in the next couple of months is the horizon when it comes to some policy papers, etc., and maybe some drafts that will be out soon.
Thank you very much, Michael, and thanks for the invitation to join this meeting today and to discuss this issue. As Michael said, I think the discussion's come at a very timely point, because where we are in the legislative process is that we are preparing a series of reforms to our energy legislation as part of what we call our winter package, which will include a revision to the core bits of legislation which are important for guarantees of origin. So by the end of the year, we're due to come forward with new proposals for amendments to both the Renewable Energy Directive, which includes the Geosystem, and also the Electricity Market Directive, which includes the disclosure requirements. So we are looking at both pieces of legislation in the same time frame, and we'll come forward with proposals exactly the same time. So I think it should give you some assurance that there will be some integration in terms of our thinking on this subject, because we're opening up both pieces of legislation at the same time. That being said, I think it's also useful to highlight that I found the conversation very interesting with the different speakers having slightly different perspectives on the issue, that we do actually cover quite a wide range of subjects, because we get quite quickly into this issue about consumer information and what should consumers see on their bills, what is the information trustworthy, what sort of requirements should be in place. And that is where from our side, we get into a sort of slightly broader area of policy making, which is slightly outside of the scope of DG Energy and moves more into our colleagues in DG Justice, who have the consumer agenda and the consumer practices agenda. So this sort of subject area touches on quite a broad range of legislation, and I think what we'd have to do to make it manageable is to try and sort of break it down into components and see what we can do under the various different instruments that we have. I was asked to speak a little bit about the policy context, so I just wanted to flag up a few things that many of you are probably very aware of, but just to highlight that, again, this subject is important in terms of the way energy policy is going. The Energy Union is the policy framework or the policy strategy that we're following at the EU level now, and that clearly identifies the need for a transition in our energy system, the need for a much greater level of renewables in the energy system, but also to drive that transition, a clear role for consumers and empowering consumers in changing our energy system into something more sustainable, more fit for the future. So this sort of subject is actually also very appropriate in terms of that political narrative and the fact that we traditionally have tended to approach energy policy often looking at the needs of producers and the producer market rather than actually focusing on the consumers. So I think, again, this is an interesting development for this subject of guarantees of origin. Other thing just to highlight in terms of policy context, I mean, one of the key driver of our energy policy is basically our climate and energy targets. We need to substantially decarbonize the energy system. We have mandatory targets for 2030 in terms of increasing the amount of renewable energy in the energy system. So we're moving into a system where we expect to see by about 2030 around 50% of the electricity generated will be from renewable sources. So anything which helps support in that transition and helps ensure that we reach those objectives is useful. And I think, again, the sort of consumer agenda and providing consumers with reliable, trustworthy information about the sources of their energy and choices over the sort of types of energy they can buy should be very beneficial and helpful in helping us reach those goals. So getting down now back into a little more detail about the geosystem itself and what we're doing in DG Energy. As many of you will be aware also, there's been quite a sort of elaborate review process which we've been going through over the last year or so. There was a midterm assessment of the Renewable Energy Directive, which gave us some pointers in terms of the issues that we should be looking at. On GEOs in particular, this flagged up that we should consider options for extending GEOs to all sources of electricity generation. Some of these points were picked up in the public consultation that we produced at the end of last year, which had a series of questions related to the future of guarantees of origin system, of the guarantees and origin system, asking questions about full disclosure, asking questions about including other types of information, such as the waste issue, the emissions issue, integrating that into the GEO, seeking stakeholder views on what should be done. The responses to that, I think, were very interesting. I think in general, I think there was a positive feeling and sentiment towards GEOs, and also generally a majority, not a consensus, a majority that further development of the GEO system is a good thing, and that we should seek to improve and develop the system. But I think when you got into the detail, there was no clear consensus about what that should involve. Some saw full disclosure, and I think that some of those opinions have been reflected in the room this afternoon. So I think that is interesting to see that there's still a lot of open issues which need further discussion. So for example, a lot of people, stakeholders, were open to full disclosure, but there were many who were doubtful about it. A majority were positive, thought it was good. Others questioned whether the administrative costs and benefits were worth the while of actually making the system broader. So I think that there still are some sort of open questions there, and there isn't a clear majority view or a consensus in terms of the way that we should be moving going forward. So we will need to reflect that in the options that we're looking at going forward. So just to finish off, I mean, we are very heavily working now in terms of developing policy options, writing impact assessment, in order to come forward with some concrete and well-considered proposals for the end of the year. So the discussion today is very helpful for me in terms of hearing views and seeing, helping inform the way that we put that process together. So I look forward to some further discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Good, to tell us something what lies ahead, especially your reflections on the winter package and the integration of thinking that is being done at the moment, and that I think many of us here at this table, around this table, have been approaching along similar lines. It's about markets, it's about renewables, and somewhere it should be connected. Now I propose, because we have 15 minutes left, and we planned for a short round of discussion amongst the speakers. There might be some issues that some people want to take up. And let's say after the first 5 minutes, because some of you here have not been able to speak, I will allow others to raise questions or to make a few statements that you want to share with us regarding the issues that we discussed. So I'll do this in a kind of a cooperation with my co-chair in the Concerted Action, Pierre-Yves. So I want to hand over the microphone to you, Pierre-Yves. Is there something you'd like to ask one of the panelists?
Thank you, Michael, because indeed there's a co-chairmanship today with AIB and the CARES, but within CARES we also have a similar sharing agreement, and so which is why I'm taking over the microphone right now. Actually, there are quite a few questions which we had prepared, but quite probably as many which I took note during this discussion. And I will just start by asking this. If we go towards, say, full disclosure, would it be, in your opinion, better to have a voluntary or to be mandatory full disclosure? So I know a few of you have answered that already, but please, I'd like to hear your view on this. Jared, please.
Maybe just one thought is to, because there are some countries, for example, where we could argue, of course, that Norway is in some ways full disclosure. In some ways, you could say that they're 100% renewable, they're producing all the renewable electricity, but there's no real mandate on consumption. And this is where it comes back to that consumers, making sure that consumers are really driving the market. And whether we support consumers or encourage consumers to really purchase renewable electricity to get it driving this way, or we provide some sorts of mandates on consumers to really purchase and develop the market as well. These are policy discussions, of course. But full disclosure is really a two-sided coin again, and that is about the production, but also about encouraging consumption as well. So encouraging proper rules around disclosure and proper rules, but also for those that don't really deal with disclosure, corporate companies as well.
Yes, linked to that, in involving the consumers and let them lead the way and make the system work is, I think, also becoming clear from research we've done in the Dutch market about if people or consumers are having knowledge about the full disclosure or the disclosure information that's now eligible to be presented on their yearly, in the case of Netherlands, on their yearly bill. And I think up to 3% spontaneously did know about this information. So I'm afraid if you make it a mandatory obligation towards, say, production, then the information on the bills will be more accurate and more precise, but consumers still, I think, then consumers still will not look to it or make decisions on it. Of course, it will also provide more possibilities for suppliers to come up with more dedicated offers, but you have to have demand to get your offers into the market. So I think when you come up with starting at a voluntary basis, having the system right, then where consumers and suppliers are getting into the game, so to say, will, in my idea, have more effect than at one time make it an obligation and the information is not really going to the consumers.
I would like to say, please do not underestimate consumers. We have seen that in both Austria, where there is a mandatory full disclosure scheme, and in Sweden, where there is a voluntary full disclosure practice going on, consumers have been very much more involved since this was rolled out, this full disclosure system. So clearly, consumers are can be made accountable, can be empowered if given the right sort of information incentives. So to answer your question, I don't think that is the most important thing we need to ask about. I think we need to realize the potential of full disclosure. By making consumers accountable, you really can make them change their behavior. And we see that consumers make different choices in Sweden than in Austria. In Austria, there is a very clear anti-nuclear sentiment, whereas in Sweden, consumers choose renewables and nuclear and really avoid fossils because of the CO2 impact or climate change impact. So clearly, consumers are not uniform or not the same animal. There are clearly choices that can be made, and full disclosure is empowering consumers to make that choice.
Should anyone else want to answer or comment, please, you're welcome to do that, of course.
We briefly discussed full disclosure within the BEUC network with our energy experts, and to us it only makes sense to make it mandatory, because otherwise all these advantages which you try to explain, like having a coherent system, a cross-border system, ending the so-called Wild Wild West, which we also observed in our mapping report. Earlier this year, we compared 13 member states and Norway in terms of disclosure policies. Then it only would make sense to have it mandatory. Otherwise, you would continue allowing national practices that are not necessarily coherent and do not link up with neighboring countries.
In my idea, the system would be harmonized all over Europe, but the obligation to producers to 100% come up with GOs for their production, or for have an obligation to suppliers to 100% back up their cells, what they sell with GOs, that's where I'm talking about. So the system should be harmonized all over Europe, so the Wild West of systems should at least be avoided.
You've actually enticed me to ask a different kind of question I had in mind, but that's fine. You've mentioned, you said suppliers. It's something we have not addressed, but I know in some countries, like in Germany, only suppliers are indeed allowed to cancel and use guarantees of origin, whereas I know that Jared mentioned that, in that example, the private companies would exchange that. Would that work? Would one system work better than the other one? I mean, limiting the cancellation of guarantees of origin to suppliers, or allowing it for companies?
We had this discussion, I think even yesterday afternoon, discussing the approach in the Netherlands, and the conclusion was, if you want to avoid double counting or have the right system, that if you choose for full disclosure with one system, then it's one way or the other. and our conclusion was that then it can only be through the supplier. That would be preferable.
Would you want to react? Or? Yeah, or someone else. Yes.
I think if it is the case that full disclosure is an activity of the supplier, we have to be very, very careful that we don't just create barriers for companies. And what I mean is not every company, because a majority of companies, even medium-sized companies, are still going to purchase electricity through a supplier. But the reality is, as electricity becomes more of a product that individual companies can also produce themselves, we have to be very concerned that we don't stifle this innovation of individual companies as well. So if a company, for example, that does not want to purchase electricity through a supplier, they want to power themselves fully by themselves, they should have the right to do this as well without having, through the requirement to go through a supply company or themselves become a supply company. So it's not for every company, of course, and I think most companies will go through suppliers, but we can't stifle the innovation of some of the biggest companies as well by forcing that sort of legislation, I think. So it's just something to be careful about.
As we are slowly drifting towards the end of the meeting, I'd really like to hear if there's someone else in the room that has not been on the speakers list that has a burning question or wants to make a statement. Please, could you shortly also introduce yourself and...
My name is Christian Schweitzer from BSE Engineering Leipzig, and I'm in the field of the biofuels. And with the renowned admittment of the RED, we have now power to fuels. And there's a big discussion in the moment to be connected to the grid and to use the GOs to produce advanced fuel from power. How do you see the misunderstanding or the option of greenwashing to produce power by a lignite power plant to produce advanced fuels in the RED and to use the GOs to make a greenwashing?
When you say, I think you have to be clear what you're using the GOs for, and for what purpose, what you're trying to, what claim you're making, because that.
Produce hydrogen to combine with CO2 to produce a CCU fuel. I need hydrogen, so I need power to produce hydrogen, and I take it from the grid.
So what?
Now
I understand you take the power from the grid, but what function is GO playing in this system? Why do you bother with the GOs? What are you trying to do?
Power from the grid, I have to take the national CO2 footprint, and I don't achieve the 60% saving target. So if I take now GOs, then I have green power to achieve the 60% saving target on the CO2 per megajoule.
So you're wanting to prove that basically the fuel is 100% renewable or something like that, using 100% renewable electricity. Well, I guess it comes down to ensuring there's no double counting, because if you're using that as an endpoint in terms of making some claim on the fuel, have to make sure that that claim on the fuel is not displacing any claim on the electricity that's been made in towards any other target achievement elsewhere. So it's a double counting issue, which is the most important thing, because if you're using it for compliance with another system, it's, you know, you're potentially mixing of apples and pears, so you have to be clear, you know, the accounting between the two different systems. When you talk about the 60% reduction target, are you talking in relation to...
The methodology in Annex 5 of the RED says they have to take the national CO2 footprint for the power you need for the process. And in Article 15, you are allowed to use the GOs to prove as a final consumer that you use green energy. So now we have some misunderstanding of differences between the fuel and the GO market.
No, well, if the article, if the annex is very clear that you use the national mix, you use the national mix.
And right now,
Yeah.
the annex was created without having the power to X fuels. And now there's an open gap.
I'm not quite clear what the gap is, but perhaps we could talk afterwards and get the detail. But, okay.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yes.
Hello, I'm Louise Ariol from the French Ministry of Energy. I just want to know if we have any idea of how much does it cost to implement a full disclosure system, if it adds something on the bill of the consumer. Well, if we have some experience from Austria, for instance.
Maybe just some thoughts about this, but I'd like to ask others because maybe they have more insights. But renewable electricity usually is more disaggregated than non-renewable technologies. And most renewables are already within the guarantee of origin systems in most of the industrialized countries. So that means to implement the non-renewables, it's usually very large installations. So the cost is actually quite low because it's large installations that produce a lot of electricity. And we've already done a lot of the hard work, we could say, by going to all the individual wind turbines and kind of seeing, because those are per device much less production than with non-renewables. So this is my perception, but maybe others have.
No, I fully support your views, Jared. I would like to add that not only is the number of plants to get into the system to issue GOs for fossil and nuclear much more limited, as Jared points out. The information that is needed is already available because these producers are already feeding that exact same information to the TSO or to the Ministry of Economic Affairs. And this information is there. It just needs to be also be given to the issuing bodies so that guarantees of origin can be issued on that basis. I want to make one additional point. I've been involved in cost-benefit analysis before, and the crucial point is, of course, what is your baseline? What is your scenario zero in your cost-benefit analysis? If we take the current situation as the baseline, of course, we risk the scenario of coming to the conclusion that costs are going to go up. But then we accept the situation as it is, that consumers are not correctly informed, are not completely informed, and are not empowered and made accountable by that information. If you take a baseline scenario for your cost-benefit analysis, which takes into account those goals, I'm pretty sure that GOs are the most cost-efficient way of achieving that goal of having consumers informed and accountable.
Concerning the Austrian case, I can confirm that apparently there were no real huge additional costs according to our Austrian member. However, as I explained before, we don't see it as a priority. It does not really help consumers to better understand the electricity market, to make a more informed choice. For this problem, you need other solutions. We need to prove that there is a real environmental benefit. And in Austria, at least, this was to some extent dealt with a special rule in the Austrian disclosure regulation. They said that every domestic megawatt hour produced in a renewable power plant in Austria has to be accompanied by a GO, and the GO cannot be split, cannot be detached from the produced megawatt hour. So in the end, the GO always follows the sale through the whole production and sales chain to the final customer, so that the household really knows that what he sees is what he pays for.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid we've already overspent a couple of minutes, the time slot that we had. But to be honest, coming to a closing, I would say, of this session, I would say concerted action, where I started, has discussed issues like these and some other issues amongst regulators, national energy agencies, issuing bodies for guarantees of origin. In short, let's say national competent authorities in a confidential setting in the last couple of years. And that is why we liked it very much to be able to reach out today a bit together with the Association of Issuing Bodies. who is a very valued partner in implementing geosystems throughout Europe in a sound and efficient and effective way. I can only say we were very happy that we were able today to provide this platform to also listen to other stakeholders that have an interest in the geosystem. And I'm sure we all have gained some new and additional insights today. And let's see what the future brings with the winter package coming up. Thank you very much for being here, and have a good trip home.